Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Women and Girls Foundation's new web show, In the Movement. I'm your host, Camila Rivera-Tinsley. Each month, we will be interviewing incredible people who are working towards creating a more sustainable and equitable future with conversations focused on gender, racial, and environmental justice. This month, I'm honored, thrilled, and excited to have our special guest, Shannon Smith, join us. We will be discussing her work at FracTracker and how it impacts the health of women in our region and beyond. Shannon, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm really thrilled to learn more about your work and learn more about what fracking actually is. So please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting FracTracker to be on the show. My background is in environmental health and public health and climate justice. And so I kind of came into this line of work in the Pacific Northwest, where there's a really long history of environmental activism. And then after my time there, I actually moved to Haiti for about 5 years, the country of Haiti, and was working in environmental and public health there as well. And so once I moved back to the United States, I wasn't quite sure, was I going to move to my home state of Pennsylvania? Was I going to move back to the Pacific Northwest? And ultimately decided to move to Pennsylvania. And by that time, the fracking boom had happened and really transformed my state where I grew up, and was really kind of shocking for me to see the environmental and public health issues that came along with fracking. So after about 6 months of searching for organizations that were working around this, I found FracTracker, and FracTracker is based in Southwest Pennsylvania. So it was really, really a perfect fit for me and my interests and my skill set. So initially I was doing communications and development work at FracTracker, and in 2021, late 2021, became the executive director of the organization. So it's just been such a privilege to meet so many different environmental advocates and leaders across the country. A lot of our work is still based in Southwest Pennsylvania, but we do work nationally and have a lot of partnerships across the entire country. So I can explain a little bit more about FracTracker and how FracTracker came to be, and our current work. So FracTracker started as a project out of the University of Pittsburgh. And this was in 2008, the advent of the fracking boom. It was technology that already existed, but it hadn't really caught on in a big way until that time period for the Marcellus Shale region, which is the shale rock that lies underneath Southwest PA and the surrounding region. So this technology came in full force. Operators were using fracking technology to break that shale rock and extract natural gas. It can also be used to extract oil, but in this region, the shale is heavily saturated with natural gas. And so fracking is a very resource-intensive process to get that natural gas out of the ground. And it comes with many environmental and health impacts, all the way from frac sand mining, where they are mining for the sand that is injected down into the shale rock, to the millions and millions of gallons of water that each frac uses, and on and on. We'll get into more of that, but there was such an information gap at that time, around 2008, 2010. So FracTracker became a 501c3 organization in 2010. And that was really our role, and continues to be our role, is to fill in any gaps in the knowledge around the impacts of fracking. So we cover a lot of different topics, from upstream, midstream to downstream in the natural gas cycle, the production cycle, to better understand the impacts of this industry. And at that time, fracking was being presented sort of as a green solution. So even the term natural gas, it sounds very benign. It sounds like a better alternative. And in fact, at that time, even big green organizations in the US were calling fracked natural gas a bridge fuel from coal to renewable energy. And since then, there's been a ton of research, some of which I'd like to touch on in our conversation today, just around how, from a climate standpoint, that's not even accurate, because if you look at that whole life cycle of natural gas production, the climate impacts are, close to what they would be with coal production, making energy from coal. So as the years have gone by, the environmental community at large has come to more of a consensus around the negative impacts of fracking. And so we're more of a united front. But as we've seen, fracking really expanded across Pennsylvania and other regions. We work with a lot of advocates around questions of how can they protect their health? How can they advocate for a cleaner environment, for environmental justice, for, less climate impacts coming from our energy production. So there's so much to cover, but that's kind of FracTracker in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I agree, that is a lot of information and a lot of work that you and your organization are embarking upon. What are some of the negative impacts of fracking that are really impacting women and girls?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic to think about, and reflecting on that question, there's actually quite a number of connections between issues that would impact self-identified women and girls and energy production and environmental justice. So not surprisingly, unfortunately, throughout the United States, pregnant women, children, Indigenous people, communities of color, and low-income communities are disproportionately impacted by fracking, by the harms of fracking. And that's similar to a lot of other environmental justice issues where, various histories, whether it be of redlining or just racist policies, have led to that situation. And so that's a big focus of the environmental movement, is more and more to really prioritize those frontline communities that are being disproportionately harmed. And in terms of the vulnerable populations like pregnant people, there have been more and more studies in the past years showing links between the pollution that comes from fracking and adverse birth outcomes. So, low birth weight, preterm births, things like that, as well as an uptick in rare childhood cancers in southwestern Pennsylvania. And there has been finally a study was released recently in southwestern Pennsylvania, looking at an 8-county area. And this was because of concerns brought from parents in, I think, Westmoreland and Washington counties, where there's been a concerning number of these rare childhood cancers, and wondering, is this because of all the fracking infrastructure that is so heavily concentrated in that area? And if you go onto FracTracker's website and you look at some of the maps, for people who don't really know very much about the extent of the fracking boom in Pennsylvania, it can be somewhat shocking to look at a map of all the wells in Pennsylvania. I mean, over 1.5 million people in Pennsylvania, I believe, live within a half-mile of at least one active fracking well.
Wow.
And this is, releasing pollution into the air. There could be flaring that's releasing pollution. The pathways for exposure could be through water as well, or through your skin. And so there's all kinds of health issues that are associated with this, from cancer to asthma, health problems, respiratory problems, mental health impacts. Like I said, the negative birth outcomes, skin rashes. So there's a lot that can be of concern for parents living close to these fracking sites. And so I've met plenty of environmental advocates, mothers and fathers, parents who didn't sign up to become experts in fracking, but unfortunately have had to, because they've experienced these health outcomes firsthand. And when your child is sick with a nosebleed, or waking up at night, or has asthma, or God forbid has a rare cancer, as a parent, whether you're a mother or a father, this is an issue that I would consider something that really impacts women and girls, because a lot of times it does tend to be the mother who's more at home and involved with the children's like day to day. And so it's very concerning. And a lot of times I feel like such a downer, you might not want to ask about my work if you invite me to a dinner party, because it is really serious. And it's something that I think is not really talked about enough in Pennsylvania. So I'm glad to be part of this conversation where we're kind of connecting the dots between environmental justice issues and issues that that impact women and girls.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I'm learning a lot just in this short conversation with you. I'm absolutely blown away that 1.5 million people live within a half mile of a frac pad. And I'm curious also. So you mentioned the study that just came out. Where can people find that study? Is that on the FracTracker website?
I would I would tell people to go to the very recently released compendium with concerned health professionals. So this is a report that's regularly produced by Physicians for Social Responsibility and others that collaborate on this. So they compile, I think the latest one has 2,000 abstracts linking medical, scientific, and investigative reports about oil and gas drilling to these health outcomes, and over 120 studies that show these health impacts that I mentioned earlier. So that's the compendium with concerned health professionals. And also to check out an annual Shale and Public Health Conference that's hosted by the PA League of Women Voters. They just had it this year, but they're a great group to follow if people want to find more information about this as well.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing. And so, as you were talking about these issues, you mentioned environmental advocates and how, a lot of the folks that you have been advocating for, they're also working side by side with you to talk to their local legislators, to advocate that for people really, for scientists to really look at some of these issues, and for these studies to be daylighted. The Women and Girls Foundation is also very much interested in making sure that we are empowering women and empowering young people to advocate for the issues that are important to them. And we do this in a lot of different ways. We work with organizations like the League of Women Voters. And we also have a program called Girl Gov, where we invest a lot in our young teens, and we teach them about their civic power, really. So how are they able to take this concern that they have and really turn it into some change that they can see right in front of their eyes? And so I'm saying all those words to say, what are some concrete ways that you would recommend the average citizen like myself, or other folks that are here in this region, how can we help to be advocates or to make real change with this particular issue?
I love that question. And I think it's so important to come back to that when I'm sort of talking about all this doom and gloom, bad news. It's easy with issues related to the climate crisis to feel kind of disempowered or like, wow, there's so many problems. What can I actually do? But there's actually so many wonderful organizations that are building power in this region, building grassroots power, contributing to knowledge, to the pool of knowledge that we can collectively tap into to advocate for better environmental protections, stronger regulations. And I can get into some of those specifics, but I would really recommend that people just start by following some of these organizations on social media. They put out really, really helpful information and timely information. So I'll just name off a few if that's okay.
Sure.
Center for Coalfield Justice, Protect PT, Clean Air Council, Environmental Health Project, Shell Accountability Project, Ohio River Valley Institute, Breathe Project, Freshwater Accountability Project. And I'll stop myself there because there are truly just so many that I could list off, but those are great ones to follow on social media. They'll periodically put out calls for action, whether it's just signing a petition, showing up at a public meeting. So they really kind of walk you through, as these issues come up, what can you do to help support the community? I also think that more attention can be brought to issues like the use of PFAS chemicals. So these are forever chemicals that are starting to get more more mentions in the national landscape, sort of like BPA in plastic was, I don't know if that was a decade ago or several decades ago at this point, but consumers started to understand that there were these dangerous chemicals in plastics, and so there was consumer demand to stop, for companies to stop using those chemicals in their products. Similarly with PFAS right now, I think it's getting more and more attention. So as consumers look for brands that don't use PFAS in their products. So the famous example is Teflon and the non-stick pans that contain PFAS. So look for products, whether it's dental floss, clothing. I mean, it's in a lot of things, including fracking chemicals. So, advocating for state laws that are stronger on PFAS could also impact the use of PFAS in the oil and gas industry, and therefore decrease the amount of pollution in our air and water from this very, very dangerous forever chemical that stays in the environment forever and causes all kinds of health issues. Similarly, I brought up radioactivity. So that's a naturally occurring part of the fracking process. So this naturally occurring radioactivity is brought up to the surface and workers are exposed to it. The exposure pathways are varied. So it impacts a lot of people living near these operations, and especially the workers. And it's also sold in certain states. I believe it is still sold as a de-icer, this brine product. So that's another example of just an issue that I think needs more attention. And so doing research about these public health interventions that are just they're sitting on the shelves in our stores, and to educate ourselves as consumers around that, I think is important. So, making sure if you have a pool and you're buying pool chemicals, that they're not radioactive fracking byproducts, which sounds crazy to say, but that is truly a concern that we have as consumers, because through loopholes, regulatory loopholes, these things are allowed to be used for those purposes. So educate yourself about this. Ask your elected officials, what are they doing about these concerns? And put pressure on the Pennsylvania governor. Governor Shapiro came up with a great list of recommendations on how to keep people safe or safer from fracking operations in Pennsylvania. This was in 2020, when he was the Attorney General in Pennsylvania. So if you go to Center for Coalfield Justice or Mad Facts, which is, I'm going to try and remember it's Moms and Dads Family Awareness Cancer Threat Spike, Mad Facts.
Mad Facts.
You can find information there about those recommendations that Governor Shapiro made in 2020. And now, the environmental community in Pennsylvania is really putting pressure on the governor to follow through on those recommendations that he himself made as Attorney General. We need stronger setbacks requirements. So right now in Pennsylvania, the only requirement is 500 feet for a fracking operation and a house, a school, a hospital, any kind of sensitive site like that. There's a lot of research showing that 500 feet in proximity to, say, a school or a home, that is far too close for reducing or preventing exposure to these really dangerous chemicals. And so advocating for bills that promote a larger setback distance of 2,500 feet or 3,000 feet. I mean, the further, the better, really. But that is one of the grand jury recommendations that Shapiro made that I think is really important for us to continue putting that pressure on our elected officials to actually implement.
Yeah, this is all really, really wonderful information. And also, I have some understanding of the things that you're saying, but I know that many people have a general understanding, but they're probably really clamoring to understand so much more. And I'm curious about what role does FracTracker take in the education of general citizens? And so, do you all do educational programming?
FracTracker is kind of a clearinghouse for a lot of different information around fracking. So we put out a lot of maps and kind of use that as data visualization to help understand the scope of the fracking supply chain. So like I was mentioning earlier, everything from frac sand mining, which is very upstream in the process, down to transportation of natural or extraction, transportation of natural gas, production, whether they're making this fracked gas into plastic products or propane or whatever the end product is. So students, for example, come to our site quite often if they're doing a project around a certain aspect of environmental justice. We have a lot of information related to probably just about any question you would be asking if it's related to fracking. So FracTracker covers a wide variety of topics from public health concerns, environmental justice, air pollution, even economic issues related to the industry. And so it's really a place for researchers, members of the media, elected officials, students, the general public to get more information. And for the general public, I think a lot of times they're coming to the FracTracker site to understand, first and foremost, what is the fracking infrastructure that's near where I live? And that can be a good starting point just to understand how might this be impacting you personally. And then as you kind of understand more about the scope of fracking in southwestern Pennsylvania, I think that just causes more concern and therefore more action around what can you do. And so I think getting involved with some of these organizations and following them. These are our partners who are really doing a lot of the grassroots work and really working directly with frontline communities. And so again, FracTracker does a lot of partnering with these organizations to provide that technical help around data and mapping and that sort of thing. We also have a mobile app that you can download. Just go to the App Store and type in FracTracker and you can find our mobile app. And that's kind of an easy way to explore our maps and understand if there are pipelines near you, if there are compressor stations or frac pads, and kind of go from there.
Oh, thank you. Um, a lot of really good information, and so glad that there is an app, something that's easy to use and easily accessible when we are on the go. And I know that I'm definitely going to be looking up my address and seeing how close I am and how this impacts me personally. So I just have one more question for you, and hopefully this one's a little more lighthearted. So, I am curious, you are an amazing leader. And I'm curious, what do you think got you interested in taking such a leadership role in this particular space? Was there one key moment? Was there something that you participated in when you were a young person? What do you think is one of the key pivotal moments of your life that got you to this space?
Wow, that is such a great question. And I think that putting the pieces together between, or just learning more about the intersectionality of climate justice issues. When I was in college, I really started to get more exposure to issues surrounding racial justice, environmental justice, international solidarity, and understanding that it's not just about recycling initiatives or changing your light bulbs. And energy reduction programs and things like that are important, but unless we are getting to the more radical roots of environmental injustice, then we're not really going to be able to build the kinds of communities that we want to see. And so this requires understanding, issues that impact women and girls, understanding the impacts of sexism, racism, patriarchy, capitalism in our society that kind of make the conditions for environmental injustices possible. So I think it was really my college education that helped me to understand some of those connections. And I remember one time I was at a protest in Portland, where I went to college, Portland, Oregon, and I saw a line of police officers protecting the banks and surrounding the banks as this student protest for environmental justice marched by. And that visual of really seeing how the state was protecting the interests of our financial institutions and, having this adversarial stance against the students who were, advocating climate justice, it was such a that was really a pivotal moment for me, where I again started to put some of the pieces together of, wow, the systems of oppression that impact us are connected to environmental extraction and, profit just accumulating in the hands of several individuals instead of being equitably distributed. So that really got me interested in the topic. And since then, I've been lucky enough to have a lot of different, diverse kinds of experiences in how to apply these topics. And now being at FracTracker, I think it's still really important to keep this framing of, environmental justice being the ultimate goal, and how can we work together towards that.
Wow. You said a lot there, and I'm glad that you had that experience, even though that is such a jarring experience to have, to see, the injustices of the world sort of on display. But there is so much good that we can do, and you are an example of that, and WGF is an example of that. And so, I want to make sure that we're ending on a positive note about the fact that we can affect change in our lives once we are aware of the information, and also once we have some solidarity and we're working with one another, as you have been mentioning. So before we close for this particular interview today, is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
I think we covered a lot. I know I covered a lot of different kinds of points. So I think I will leave it there, but I just want to say thank you again. And I really appreciate that point about, working together and ending on a positive note, because, when you attend some of these events in person, if you follow some of these organizations on social media, you go to some of the events, I think you'll be surprised at how much it just boosts your morale and makes you feel like, okay, people really are doing amazing work and change is possible. So I really just encourage people to get involved, whether it's just going to a rally or a public meeting. I think it really makes a big impact.
Yeah. Community is so important. And maybe it's an overused word. Many things get overused, but we have to be able to support one another and lift one another up. And so glad to be able to do that. Well, thank you, Shannon, so much for joining us today. Learning more about your work was truly inspiring, and also eye-opening for me. And this year, so in 2024, WGF, we are planning to have a series of community conversations where we are just educating our greater Western PA and Southwestern PA community about some of these issues like fracking, and also empowering people so that they feel like there's something that they are able to do once they walk away. And so maybe we'll get a chance to work together again on during one of our community conversations. All right. If our friends out there in the audience want to learn more about your work, they can find you at, can you give us your website handle?
FracTracker.org, and all of our social media is at FracTracker, FracTracker.
Excellent. And if you want to learn more about the Women and Girls Foundation, please visit our website at wgfpa.org. Again, we're really glad that you joined us for this time, and we're glad and hope that you out there, if you're watching this video, that you learned a little something, and that you feel inspired to go out and make change in your world.